Christopher West is the kind of man who never looks back. A self-made logistics tycoon, he's used to empty hotel suites, missed holidays, and boardroom victories that echo in silence. But one snowy Christmas Eve in Minneapolis, fate changes everything. With a snowstorm grounding flights and freezing the city to a halt, Christopher orders a last-minute ride-share. A worn-out SUV pulls up. Inside, a single mom named Rachel drives through the storm, her 6-year-old son Charlie humming Silent Night from the back seat. That voice, innocent, pure, familiar. As they talk, something begins to thaw inside him. The child's question, "Do you have a family?" hits harder than any boardroom blow. What starts as a cold ride through snow becomes a journey through the past, through grief, and toward something Christopher thought he'd never find again: connection. But when news spreads that the CEO skipped a shareholder meeting to share Christmas dinner with a boy who sings, the world pays attention. Some ridicule him. Others call it redemption. Will this simple moment of kindness risk his empire, or rebuild something far greater? Subscribe now and discover the story behind The Man with No Tree, a story of music, loss, and the family you never see coming. Christopher West stared out the frostbitten glass of Terminal D, his sharp gray eyes watching the wind-driven snow erase the Minneapolis skyline. It was Christmas Eve. Flight delays blinked red across the screen above him like a bad joke. The rest of the world had someone waiting at home. He had a leather briefcase and a board packet for the most important shareholders' meeting of the year. He adjusted his Rolex, not because he needed to check the time, but because it was a habit born from years of controlling what he could: his schedule, his empire, and most especially, his emotions. "Car services are offline, sir," his assistant had informed him over the phone earlier. "Weather's grounding everything." That was fine. Christopher didn't like being driven anyway. He preferred to move fast and stay ahead, on the road, in business, in life. Still, he tapped through the rideshare app. A single driver pinged back. Rachel D. 5 minutes away. Good enough. The SUV that pulled up was a battered Suburban, the kind that hadn't seen a dealership in a decade. He opened the door to the back seat and hesitated. A child's booster seat and a small stuffed bear occupied one side. "You, Mr. West?" came a voice from the front. It was calm, but tired. He slid in. "I am." Rachel turned around briefly. She looked about mid-30s, bundled in a coat far too thin for the weather, a few strands of damp hair stuck to her cheek. Her eyes were the color of old paperbacks. Soft, used, but still worth reading. "This might take longer than expected," she said, turning the defrost higher. "Snow's a bully tonight." Christopher gave a nod. "I'm used to delays." It wasn't a lie. He had spent most of his adult life waiting in sterile lounges, boardrooms, and 5-star hotels. But there was something unsettling about this car, something not scripted or curated. It was lived in, human. From the back seat behind him, a quiet voice began humming. A child's voice, pure and delicate. It took him a second to register the melody. Silent Night. His spine stiffened. He hadn't heard that song in years, not since he was 12, when his younger brother Liam had sung it during a school concert weeks before a heart condition had taken him away forever. Christopher turned slightly. A little boy, no older than 6, was sitting cross-legged, holding a small book of Christmas carols, mouthing the lyrics like they were sacred spells. "I'm sorry," Rachel said quickly. "This is my son, Charlie. His sitter bailed and—" "It's fine," Christopher interrupted, but more softly than he intended. Charlie glanced up at him with curious brown eyes. "Hi," he said shyly, then returned to his humming. Christopher leaned back, surprised by the crack in his own composure. He focused on the snow streaking across the windshield, forcing his heart to calm. He didn't do nostalgia. He didn't do small talk. He didn't do Christmas. And yet, there he was, sitting beside a boy singing Silent Night while his mother drove through a blizzard. So, Rachel ventured, headed to a family thing? He hesitated. No, work meeting. On Christmas Eve? Her tone wasn't judgmental, just surprised. Some people don't celebrate. Rachel gave a quiet laugh. Fair. Some of us just try to survive it. Silence stretched between them for a few miles until Charlie asked gently, "Do you have a Christmas tree?" Christopher blinked. "No, I don't." Why not? The question was too innocent, too simple. It cut deeper than it should have. "I guess I never saw the point," he replied flatly. Charlie nodded solemnly. Everyone should have a tree, even if it's small. Christopher didn't answer. He watched as the boy pulled a crayon from his coat pocket and started sketching something on the back of a grocery receipt. When he was done, he handed it forward between the seats. "For you." Christopher took it slowly. It was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures under a crooked green tree with yellow dots for lights. A tall man stood between a boy and a woman. There were smiles on all their faces. He stared at it longer than he meant to. When they reached the hotel, Rachel turned around, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That'll be $28. Christopher pulled out a $100 bill and held it out to her. Rachel shook her head. "That's too much. Consider it a holiday bonus." But she didn't take it. "I'm not a charity case, sir," she said quietly. "Just a mom doing her job." Christopher nodded respectfully, then opened the door. Charlie leaned forward, eyes wide. "Merry Christmas, mister." He turned back one last time. "Merry Christmas, Charlie." As the SUV pulled away into the swirling snow, Christopher stood in the hotel's awning, still holding the drawing. The wind bit at his coat, but inside his chest something unfamiliar and warm stirred. He walked inside, but this year, for the first time in decades, the lobby's grand tree didn't feel like just another decoration. It felt like a question. And he didn't yet know the answer. The elevator chimed softly as it rose toward the top floor of the Langford Hotel, where Christopher West always stayed when in Minneapolis. Room 1702, a suite as sterile and silent as everyone he'd stayed in for years. Polished floors, modern furniture, a bottle of Bordeaux no one would open. Everything immaculate. Everything hollow. He placed his leather briefcase on the table, but his hand hesitated. Still clutched in it was the crumpled grocery receipt, Charlie's drawing. He unfolded it again, smoothing the paper with deliberate care. That uneven little Christmas tree. Those 3 smiling figures. He didn't know why it felt so heavy in his hands, like it weighed more than the paper allowed. He left it on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the city was blanketed in white. Below, headlights crawled through icy streets like veins under glass. Somewhere out there, that little boy and his mother were driving home, maybe to a cold apartment, maybe to nothing at all. Christopher poured himself a glass of water and stared out into the dark. It wasn't that he didn't have memories of Christmas. He did. Years ago, when his brother was still alive, when the house smelled like pine and cookies and not corporate leather and silence. But everything had changed after Liam passed. His parents had fallen apart, and he'd thrown himself into work because it was the only thing that didn't vanish, the only thing that couldn't die. Or so he thought. Now, a child's voice in the back of a snow-dusted SUV had shaken something loose, and it wouldn't go back into place. The next morning, Christopher was already awake before the alarm. He sat at the edge of the bed in a robe, the drawing in his hand again. He didn't know what he was planning to do, only that the thought of going to the meeting and forgetting that ride felt wrong. He called downstairs. "Do you have a phone book or anything with local residential directories?" The concierge sounded startled. "Sir, we typically—" "I'm looking for a woman named Rachel. Drives for Rids. Had a child named Charlie. I need to find them." A pause. "We'll see what we can do." 30 minutes later, an assistant manager arrived at his door with a printed address from a tip left by another driver. "She lives off 5th and Hennepin. It's not the best area, sir." Christopher nodded once. "Thank you." By mid-morning, he was standing in front of a brick walk-up with a sagging roof and a line of salted ice crawling down the steps. The air smelled like wood smoke and frozen pavement. He knocked. The door creaked open slowly. Rachel blinked, stunned. Her coat was zipped, and her hair was tied back in a loose braid. "Mr. West?" "I didn't know how else to find you," he said awkwardly. Well, Charlie's drawing. It stayed with me." She looked at him warily, one hand still on the door. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sure," he admitted honestly. "But I was wondering, would you and Charlie join me for dinner tonight? I have a reservation, and I think no one should eat alone on Christmas." Rachel stared at him like she was trying to decide if this was kindness or something else. Behind her, Charlie peeked out with a gap-toothed grin. "Hi, mister. You came back?" That did it. Rachel's shoulders relaxed. "We'd be honored." That evening, the dining room at the Langford was dimly lit and adorned with crystal wreaths. The maitre d' looked confused when Christopher entered with a woman in a thrift store coat and a child in snow boots, but said nothing. They sat at a private table near the fireplace. Charlie's eyes lit up at the decorations, and he kept pointing out ornaments he liked. Rachel was quiet at first, unsure how to act in a world of waiters and linen napkins. But Christopher surprised even himself. He told stories, funny ones, about traveling and getting stuck in airports. He asked Charlie about music. He asked Rachel about teaching. Slowly, laughter replaced awkwardness. Then, Charlie reached into his small backpack and handed Christopher something. "I made another one," he said proudly. "It's a new drawing." Christopher unfolded it. This time, there were 4 figures under the tree, and next to the tallest figure, the word Chris. He didn't speak. His throat closed too fast for words. Rachel looked down at the table, blinking back emotion. "He hasn't drawn his dad in a while," she murmured. "You made quite the impression." Christopher nodded, his voice thick. So did he. The fireplace crackled. The snow fell, and for the first time in years, Christopher West felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. It was nearly midnight when Rachel and Charlie stepped out of the Langford Hotel, hand in hand, a small to-go bag clutched in her other arm. Dessert. Christopher insisted they take home. Snow drifted gently in the air, soft flakes catching the light like falling stars. The valet offered to call them a cab, but Rachel shook her head. "We'll walk. It's only a few blocks." Christopher watched from the entrance, hands tucked in the pockets of his long wool coat. For a moment he considered calling out, offering a ride, but something told him to let them go, just for now. Back in the suite, Christopher sat alone by the fireplace. The drawing Charlie had given him rested beside a half-full glass of red wine. He traced the stick figure labeled Chris with his finger. He hadn't expected the ache it would stir in him, the strange warmth that came with it. He thought of Liam. His younger brother had been just about Charlie's age when the heart defect took him. Christopher had only been 13. He remembered the hospital rooms, the oxygen tubes, the lullabies his mother used to hum, and how silent the house had become after Liam died. His parents never recovered. Neither did he, really. His life had become a string of airports and boardrooms. Every holiday just another reason to work harder, push further. He'd convinced himself he didn't miss anything, until a little boy's voice from the backseat of a snow-dusted car brought it all back. The next morning, Christopher awoke early, a sense of unfamiliar energy buzzing beneath his skin. He canceled his meetings. Instead, he opened his laptop and began a search. Not for data, not for quarterly reports, but for something far more uncertain. He searched for music scholarships in Minneapolis. Then, for private music teachers. Then, carefully, for Rachel Grant. Not long after, he received a call from the concierge. "Mr. West, a small package was left for you downstairs. No return name." Curious, he rode the elevator down. The package was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Inside, he found a thank you card, hand-drawn snowflakes decorating the edges and written in the center in neat child's handwriting. "Dear Mr. Chris, thank you for dinner. Mom says you're very fancy, but I think you're also kind. I wrote a song about you. Love, Charlie." Folded inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, lyrics scrawled in blue crayon. "The Man with No Tree." He read it once, then again. His throat tightened. It wasn't complex, but it was sincere. A child's observation turned into melody. It talked about a man who had everything, but no one to sing to. A man who rode in big cars, but came home to silence. And then one day, a little boy gave him a song. Tears welled in Christopher's eyes as he clutched the paper. Later that evening, he visited Rachel's apartment again, this time unannounced. The building was old, but she'd managed to make their small unit feel like home. Paper snowflakes hung in the window. A plastic tree sat on a table, adorned with homemade ornaments. Rachel opened the door, surprised. "Mr. West." "Christopher," he interrupted gently. "Please." She hesitated, then smiled. "Christopher, come in." Charlie was on the floor, coloring. He jumped up when he saw him. "You got my song?" "I did," Christopher said, crouching to meet his gaze. "It was perfect." Charlie beamed. "I'm going to write more." "I think you should." Christopher hesitated, then looked up at Rachel. "Actually, that's why I'm here." Rachel's brow furrowed. He stood, shifting slightly. "I've done some research. There's a youth music program at the university, weekend workshops, real instructors, and they've got scholarships. I'd like to sponsor Charlie." Rachel's mouth parted. "That's incredibly generous, but we couldn't—" "It's not charity," he said quickly, firmly. "It's an investment in someone with real talent." Her eyes softened, but still hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" Christopher looked down at Charlie, who now held his hand without hesitation. "Because I think I was supposed to meet you," he said honestly. "Because your son reminded me that music still matters, that connection still matters, and maybe I just don't want to spend another Christmas alone." Silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, but meaningful. Then Charlie pulled him toward the tree. "You can help hang this one," he said, holding up a shiny, hand-painted ornament. Christopher laughed, a real, warm sound, and followed him. That night, as they drank cocoa and decorated the little tree, the snow continued falling outside. But inside, something new was beginning to take root. Not quite family, not yet, but something close, something hopeful. And, for the first time in years, Christopher West didn't feel like a man with no tree. He felt like he belonged under one. It had been years since Christopher West had walked into a morning with something other than a schedule weighing on his chest. But today, as sunlight streamed through the hotel windows and glinted off the crayon-colored lyrics Charlie had given him, something else stirred. Gratitude. He slipped the paper into his briefcase alongside a stack of presentation materials. Today wasn't just any day. The quarterly shareholder briefing awaited him, an event where silence or sentimentality was seen as weakness. He'd built an empire by mastering those rules. But as the elevator descended toward the car that would take him to West Logistics' downtown headquarters, Charlie's lyrics echoed in his mind. The man with no tree heard a song. The driver opened the door. "Good morning, Mr. West." Christopher nodded, but said nothing. Outside, the city buzzed under a blanket of soft snow, muffling its usual sharpness. For the first time in decades, he noticed the children dragging sleds on the sidewalk, the shopkeeper brushing snow from his awning, the faint sound of a caroler's violin near the station entrance. He hadn't noticed these things in years, and suddenly he didn't want to stop noticing. Inside the conference room, the temperature was as cold as the board's collective stare. 12 faces stared at him from around a polished mahogany table, and a massive screen behind him flickered with bar graphs, projections, and market trends. "Christopher," began Elaine, the board's vice chair, "you canceled yesterday's meeting without notice, during our peak logistics season." He set his briefcase down with careful deliberation. "I had a more urgent engagement." A murmur moved through the room like a low tide. "More urgent than a $120 million client acquisition?" barked Stanton, the CFO. "Yes," Christopher said simply. The room fell still. He paused, then opened the briefcase, not to retrieve the numbers, but to unfold Charlie's crayon-written lyrics. "I'd like to read something," he said quietly, "a few lines from a song, written by a 6-year-old boy I met during the snowstorm." Confusion flickered across the board members' faces. Christopher didn't flinch. He wrote about a man with everything: cars, suits, power, but no tree, no joy, no one waiting for him at the end of the day. He laid the paper down. "That man was me." Elaine leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Chris, what exactly is your point?" "My point," he said, voice warming with conviction, "is that we are in the business of connection, of bringing people what they need, faster, safer, better, and yet somewhere along the line I stopped thinking about what I needed." He exhaled. "I didn't just miss a meeting yesterday. I found a child who reminded me that kindness is not a seasonal commodity, and I'm not ashamed of that." Stanton scoffed. "So, what, you're adopting orphans now? Is this a publicity stunt?" Christopher's jaw tightened, but he kept calm. "This is not a stunt. It's a choice. I've sponsored the child's music education. I'm setting up a small grant in his name to support youth arts across this city, because no child with that much talent should be sidelined by hardship." There was a long, stunned pause. Then Elaine, usually the first to push for profit margins, spoke. "You think our shareholders will see this as strength?" "I think they'll see it as something more valuable," Christopher said quietly. "Authenticity." Someone at the far end of the table coughed. Another adjusted his glasses. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the room shifted. That evening, Christopher didn't return to his suite. He returned to Rachel's neighborhood, the time not as a passenger, but as a man with purpose. He carried with him a cello, gently wrapped in cloth, and a folder of application forms for the St. Paul School of Music. Rachel opened the door in surprise. "Christopher? You didn't have to—" "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to." Charlie ran up, bright-eyed. "You came back!" Christopher knelt, setting the cello down. "This was my brother's. I think he'd want you to have it." Charlie reached out reverently. "I've never touched a real one before." Rachel's eyes glistened. "Why are you doing this?" Christopher met her gaze, this time with no hesitation. "Because it's Christmas, and I finally understand what that means." They sat together that night, warming their hands around mugs of cider. Charlie played 3 notes on the cello. Wobbly, imperfect, beautiful. Rachel laughed quietly as he tried again. Christopher leaned back, a gentle smile tugging at the edges of his mouth. He had missed the corporate dinner, the board gala, the year-end toast. But here, in a modest living room filled with music and candlelight, he felt something rare and profound. He felt home. The next morning arrived with the quiet hush only a snowy Minneapolis morning could carry. Outside Rachel's small duplex, the world shimmered under a fresh layer of white, sunlight refracting like hope through frost-draped windows. Inside, the modest living room smelled of cinnamon oatmeal and coffee. Rachel stirred the pot while Charlie colored in a music workbook at the table, his tongue peeking slightly from the corner of his mouth in concentration. Christopher stood by the window, hands loosely clasped behind his back, watching the flakes fall. He'd planned to stay just long enough to drop off the cello and offer support, but somehow he hadn't left. Not last night. Not yet. And for once in his life, he didn't feel the need to rush off. Rachel noticed him gazing out. "You don't have meetings today?" "I canceled them," he said plainly, turning toward her. "I figured the world can wait one more day." Rachel smiled faintly, though her brow creased with caution. "And the board? Your investors?" Christopher exhaled through his nose, half amusement, half weariness. "They'll survive. For the first time in years, I chose something personal." She set 2 mugs of coffee on the table, handing one to him. "Well, in that case, you're just in time for Charlie's big morning concert." Charlie perked up. "I practiced Silent Night on the cello. Want to hear?" "I'd be honored," Christopher said, sinking slowly into the armchair across from the boy. Charlie retrieved the instrument with both hands, almost reverently, positioning it just like the YouTube video Rachel had shown him. He played slowly, haltingly, but the melody, even if imperfect, carried an emotion that pierced through the silence of the room. When he finished, he looked up expectantly. Christopher clapped, his voice warm and steady. "That was beautiful, Charlie." Charlie beamed. "Mom says music makes hard things feel softer." Rachel reached over to squeeze her son's hand. "It was your father's favorite carol," she said softly. Christopher hesitated. "You talk about him often?" Rachel nodded. "When I can. He was kind, curious. He wanted to be a music teacher too, like me, before—" Her voice faltered and she looked away. Christopher didn't press. Instead, he leaned forward. "And Charlie wants to be a composer?" Charlie nodded excitedly. "I want to write songs that make people cry happy tears." "Well," Christopher said, smiling, "you're already off to a good start." After breakfast, they bundled up in scarves and boots. The city was still digging out from the storm, but Christopher insisted on walking with them to the community music center, where Charlie had a free group lesson. The 3 of them, mismatched in rhythm and fashion, businessman, single mom, little dreamer, walked like they'd done it for years. Outside the center, Rachel stopped. "You really don't have to stay." "I know," he said gently, "but I want to." She searched his eyes for a beat, her voice barely above the hum of passing snowplows. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Because yesterday, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered, not as a CEO, not as a title, just as a person." Rachel softened. "Then stay, but only if you're sure. I've never been more certain." That evening, Christopher returned to his hotel to find a stack of voicemail messages and unread emails. One subject line caught his eye. "Urgent. Board considering interim leadership. Response required." He stared at the words, unmoving. Once, a message like that would have ignited fury or panic. Now, it made him thoughtful. He dialed Elaine directly. "Christopher," she said without preamble, "they're talking about replacing you. You've been unreachable." "I know," he replied calmly. "I've been defending you," she continued. "But you need to address this." "I will," he said. "Just not tonight." "Then when?" "Soon." He ended the call and looked out at the city. For the first time, he realized what power really meant. Not dominance, but the ability to choose presence over profit. Later that night, he sat at his suite's desk with a pen in hand, staring at a blank piece of paper. After a pause, he began writing. "To the board of West Logistics. Thank you for entrusting me with the helm of this company. You deserve to know that my recent actions were not a deviation from leadership, but an evolution of it." He paused, thoughtfully underlining the word evolution. Outside, snow fell again. Quiet, slow, deliberate. Inside, Christopher kept writing, the cello's melody from earlier still gently echoing in his chest. It wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of everything. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the hotel windows, catching on the crystal decanter that sat untouched beside Christopher's bed. He'd barely slept. His thoughts, once filled with logistics reports and quarterly growth, now orbited around a little boy's voice humming "Silent Night," and the way Rachel's eyes softened when she spoke about music and survival. The board could wait. He dressed deliberately, not in his usual tailored suit, but in a navy sweater, jeans, and his old leather boots he hadn't worn in years, the kind you kept not for style, but for comfort. That morning, he had somewhere far more important to be than a boardroom. By noon, he stood outside Rachel's apartment again, holding a modestly wrapped box. He knocked once, then again. When the door creaked open, Charlie's grin appeared before his voice did. "You came back." Christopher smiled gently. "Told you I would, didn't I?" Rachel appeared behind her son, wiping flour from her hands. "We were just baking cookies." "I hope I'm not intruding." Rachel stepped aside and motioned him in. "Not at all. We were just about to decorate the tree. Well, what passes for a tree around here." He stepped inside and saw it. A crooked 3-foot pine sitting in the corner, its branches strung with popcorn, construction paper ornaments, and one string of blinking lights that seemed more stubborn than festive. It was imperfect, but it was alive. Charlie raced ahead. "We made all the decorations ourselves. Mom let me put on my song playlist." He pressed a button on a tiny speaker, and within seconds Bing Crosby's voice floated through the air, singing about a white Christmas. Christopher watched the boy twirl in his socks across the linoleum floor, his laughter lifting the mood like a cathedral bell. "I brought something," Christopher said, holding out the box to Rachel. She hesitated before opening it, revealing a neatly carved wooden ornament. A cello, painted deep blue, with the name Charlie etched in silver across the scroll. Rachel swallowed hard. "Where did you find this?" "I had it made last night," he said quietly. "There was a man in the hotel lobby selling woodcrafts. I showed him a picture of Charlie playing." She ran her fingers across the smooth grain, her voice shaky. "It's beautiful." Charlie peeked over her shoulder, his eyes wide. "Can we hang it, Mom?" "Of course." Christopher watched as Charlie placed the ornament at the very center of the little tree, adjusting it until it was perfectly straight. Then, suddenly, the boy turned. "Do you have a tree?" The question hit Christopher harder than expected. "I don't," he admitted. Charlie looked concerned. "But it's Christmas." Christopher's smile was thin. "I haven't had one in years." Charlie tilted his head. "Not even a tiny one?" "Not even that." Rachel chimed in softly. "It's not something everyone keeps up with, sweetheart." "But everyone should have something to decorate," Charlie insisted, then turned to Christopher. "Wait here." Before anyone could ask, the boy disappeared into his room and came back moments later with a handmade paper star, folded and slightly crinkled, but decorated with careful swirls of gold crayon. He held it up. "For your room. Now you have a tree topper, even if you don't have a tree." Christopher took the star, his throat suddenly tight. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Rachel watched him, her gaze searching. "You okay?" He nodded, though the answer felt heavier than the gesture. "I've spent years chasing perfection. But this paper star, it means more than all the things I've surrounded myself with." Rachel looked at him carefully, then sat beside him on the couch. "You don't have to explain. Sometimes, it takes a child's kindness to remind us we're still allowed to feel." He nodded slowly, the paper star still in his hand. Later that night, they sat on the couch, the cookies cooling on the counter, the little tree twinkling in the corner. Charlie had fallen asleep with his head on Rachel's lap, his tiny snores steady as a drumbeat. Christopher leaned back, gazing at the boy, his voice barely audible. I missed so many holidays, so many moments. Rachel glanced at him. You're here now. He turned to her. I don't know how to do this. There's no manual, she said, her voice gently teasing. You just show up, and you listen. A moment of silence passed, heavy with meaning. Then, Christopher reached into his pocket, pulling out the company-issued phone he rarely put down. Without a word, he turned it off. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's serious, huh? He chuckled. It's the first time I've ever shut it off during Christmas. The warmth of the room, the laughter that had echoed earlier, the scent of cinnamon, the soft glow of imperfection, wrapped around him like a long-forgotten blanket. He hadn't felt this human in years. Outside, snow began to fall again. Inside, a man with no tree held a paper star in his palm and started to believe, just maybe, that this Christmas he had found something far more enduring. A home. The following morning, Christopher awoke in his hotel suite with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Not for a merger, not for a presentation, but for a dinner invitation he was about to extend, and the uncertain answer that might come with it. Downstairs in the cafe, the staff greeted him with their usual polished smiles, but he hardly noticed. He was already drafting words in his mind, rehearsing how to ask a mother and her son, virtual strangers, to share the Christmas dinner with him. It felt absurd, and yet right. He dialed Rachel's number with an uncharacteristic flutter in his chest. Hello? Rachel, it's Christopher. There was a slight pause on the other end. Hey, everything okay? He inhaled slowly. Yes, more than okay. Listen, I know it's last minute and I know you probably have plans, but I was wondering if you and Charlie would join me for Christmas dinner tonight. Here, at the hotel. Just something simple. Rachel didn't respond immediately. I don't want you to feel obligated, Christopher added quickly. Last night meant a lot. I thought maybe we could share the evening again. Her voice softened. We'd love to. That evening, Rachel and Charlie stepped into the marble lobby of the hotel dressed in modest but lovingly prepared clothes. Charlie wore a red sweater with a snowman stitched on the front, and Rachel wore a navy blue coat that hugged her gently at the waist. She looked radiant under the twinkling lights of the lobby tree. Christopher met them by the elevators, breath catching slightly when he saw them. You both look incredible, he said honestly. Charlie grinned. Mom let me pick the sweater. You've got great taste, Christopher replied warmly. Ready? They were led into the hotel's private dining room, where a fire flickered gently behind a glass hearth and soft carols played from a nearby piano. The table was set simply but elegantly, with flickering candles, folded linen napkins, and a single white rose at the center. This is beautiful, Rachel said quietly as they sat. Thank you. It's nothing extravagant, Christopher said, suddenly self-conscious. I didn't want it to feel like a performance. It doesn't, she assured him. It feels like something real. Over dinner, laughter came easily. Charlie devoured mashed potatoes and turkey with the glee of someone who hadn't had a full plate in weeks, while Rachel shared stories about her time as a music teacher. Christopher listened, leaning in with genuine interest, smiling often, almost boyishly. At one point, Charlie tugged on his sleeve. Can I give you something? Christopher blinked. Me? Charlie nodded and pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. It's a song I wrote. It's called The Man with No Tree. Christopher's breath caught as he opened it. Crayon drawings accompanied the lyrics. Lines about a man who works so hard he forgets what he's missing, and a little boy who reminds him with music. He read each word carefully, then looked up, emotion flickering in his eyes. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's given me in a long time." Charlie beamed, and Rachel placed a gentle hand on her son's back, her own eyes glistening. Christopher folded the paper reverently. "I'm going to frame this." After dessert, as snow began to dust the hotel's large bay windows, Charlie yawned and leaned against his mother's shoulder. Rachel looked toward Christopher. "He's exhausted," she said softly. "I could have a car take you home," he offered. Rachel hesitated. "Actually, could we just stay a while longer?" Christopher nodded. "Of course." They sat together near the fire, wrapped in a silence that felt like comfort instead of awkwardness. Rachel looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done a lot for us, more than most would ever do." Christopher looked at the boy curled beside her. "You and Charlie reminded me what kindness feels like, what presence feels like. That matters more than anything I've achieved." Rachel studied him. "You're not who I expected you to be." Christopher chuckled softly. "I'm not who I expected either." After walking them to the elevator, Christopher lingered in the hallway long after the doors closed. He held Charlie's song in his hand, rereading the final line. "Even the man with no tree can grow one if he wants to." That night, he called his assistant. "Diane," he said, voice steady, "I need you to cancel all post-holiday meetings until further notice." She paused. "Sir? I'll explain later. I have a tree to decorate." The snow was still falling gently when Rachel tucked Charlie into bed that night. They'd returned home hours after their Christmas dinner with Christopher, but the glow of the evening hadn't dimmed. Charlie held his little notebook close to his chest, where his song, "The Man with No Tree," was carefully folded inside. "I think he liked it, Mom," he whispered sleepily, eyes fluttering. Rachel smoothed back his curls and kissed his forehead. "He didn't just like it, sweetheart. You made him feel something real." Charlie smiled. "I think he needed a Christmas." Rachel sat beside the bed, heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. "I think we all did." As the apartment grew quiet, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it slowly. "Thank you for tonight. Truly. If you're free tomorrow, I'd love to see you both again. C." Rachel stared at the message for a moment. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she smiled softly and typed back, "We'd like that. Good night, Christopher." The next morning, Christopher was already downstairs waiting in his car by the time Rachel and Charlie emerged from their building. This time, he'd left the town car behind and chosen a rental SUV, modest and unassuming. The change didn't go unnoticed. "Someone's learning subtlety," Rachel teased as she opened the passenger door. "I'm a quick study," he replied with a wink, helping Charlie into the back seat. "Where are we going?" Charlie asked excitedly, buckling in. "You'll see," Christopher said, his tone playful. They drove through the freshly plowed streets, the city still quiet from the Christmas lull. As they turned onto a familiar stretch of road, Rachel recognized the towering glass of the hotel, but blinked in surprise when Christopher passed it. "I thought we were—" "Not today," he interrupted gently. "Today's about something different." They arrived at a tree lot tucked behind a small church, still open for post-Christmas donations and late buyers. A few families wandered among the evergreens, bundled in scarves and mittens. Christopher turned to them, almost sheepishly. "I never had a tree, not since I was a kid, but Charlie's song got me thinking. Maybe I was missing something." Charlie gasped. "We're getting a tree." "Not just any tree," Christopher said, eyes twinkling. "Ours." The three of them wandered through the rows, Christopher watching in quiet wonder as Rachel and Charlie debated the merits of short and fat versus tall and thin. Eventually, Charlie pointed at one with crooked branches and uneven fullness. "This one," he declared with confidence. Why this one? Christopher asked, amused. Charlie shrugged. It looks like it needs a home. Christopher's heart tightened. Then it's perfect. They tied it to the roof and drove back to Rachel's apartment. Christopher insisted on carrying it himself, even as needles scratched at his coat. Inside, the scent of pine quickly filled the modest space, and Charlie ran around gathering their single strand of lights and handful of hand-me-down ornaments. I didn't know you had decorations, Christopher said as Rachel unwrapped a fragile glass angel. I've held on to the ones that matter, she said softly, even when things got hard. Together, they decorated the tree, laughing as the lights tangled, gasping when an ornament fell and miraculously didn't shatter. At one point, Christopher lifted Charlie onto his shoulders so he could place the angel at the top. It sat slightly crooked, but no one minded. As they stepped back to admire their work, Rachel's eyes glistened. I haven't seen Charlie this happy in years. Christopher glanced at her, voice low. He gave me something last night that I can't explain, that you gave me by raising him like this. Rachel looked at him with quiet understanding. You gave something back too, hope. They spent the rest of the afternoon playing cards and sipping cocoa. Christopher helped Charlie write another song, and Rachel read aloud from an old storybook she'd kept since childhood. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in dusky gold, Christopher checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls, emails piling up. A board meeting had been scheduled for tomorrow morning to address his absence. Rachel noticed the shadow cross his face. Work? He nodded, slowly pocketing the phone. Yeah, but they can wait. She tilted her head, studying him. Are you sure? Christopher looked around the room, at the tree, the scattered mugs, the boy humming to himself as he colored a picture of their trio. Absolutely. That night, when he returned to the hotel, Christopher didn't go straight to bed. He stopped at the front desk and asked the concierge a question that made the young man blink in surprise. Can you find me a realtor who works fast? The concierge hesitated. Buying property, sir? Christopher nodded. Yes, a home. For 3. He paused, then corrected himself, his voice softer. For family. The hotel boardroom was colder than usual the next morning, not in temperature, but in mood. 11 directors sat in silence around a polished mahogany table, their gazes fixed on the empty leather chair at its head. The digital clock on the wall clicked past 9:00 a.m. Christopher West, CEO of West Line Logistics, was officially late to a meeting that could determine the future of the company's international expansion. By 9:07, murmurs had started. At 9:13, the door opened. Christopher walked in quietly, his tailored suit replaced by a thick sweater and slacks. No assistant trailed behind him, no briefcase in hand. He carried only a manila folder and a faint trace of snow still clinging to his boots. Good morning, he said, taking his seat. Mr. West, began Margaret Lynn, the COO, her voice clipped. We were concerned. Your absence yesterday raised questions, internally and in the press. I'm aware, Christopher replied calmly. A board member down the table cleared his throat. The media's running with a story about you, skipping the investor summit to dine with a child and his single mother at a 5-star restaurant. It's gone viral. Christopher opened the folder and slid a piece of sheet music across the table. Read this, he said softly. There was an awkward pause before Margaret picked it up. Her eyes scanned the title, The Man with No Tree. A child wrote this? Someone asked incredulously. Christopher nodded. His name is Charlie. He rode in the backseat of a taxi I happened to take during the storm. He sang to me. That song, his song, made me realize I've spent my life moving things, not people. Building roots, not relationships. He leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. I've spent decades expanding a business that delivers packages to every corner of the world. But it took a 6-year-old to show me I've never truly delivered anything that matters. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, others blinked, absorbing his words. I'm not apologizing for where I was yesterday, Christopher continued, because for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I needed to be. Margaret pursed her lips. So, you're saying one night of sentiment is more important than the Tokyo contract? No, Christopher said, his voice laced with resolve. I'm saying that everything I've built means nothing if I don't remember why I built it, and who it's supposed to serve. Silence fell again. No one quite knew how to respond. Then, slowly, an older director at the far end of the table, Mr. Reynolds, quiet and notoriously hard to impress, cleared his throat. My wife cried reading that song, he said. We've been married 42 years. She said it reminded her of when I missed our son's first Christmas for a merger. I've regretted it ever since. Christopher met his eyes and nodded gratefully. Margaret leaned back, eyebrows raised, recalibrating. Fine. You've made your point. But the press is still circling, and stakeholders want answers. They'll get them, Christopher replied, and not just answers, a promise. He opened the folder again and pulled out a second sheet. This is the charter for a new initiative. We're starting a philanthropic division, Westline Heart, focused on supporting families affected by financial hardship, especially those with children in the arts. The first grant is already in place. It's called the Charlie Grant Fund. Gasps rippled through the room. I'm funding it with a portion of my personal shares, Christopher added, and I'll be taking a temporary leave to establish it properly. You're stepping back? Margaret asked sharply. I'm stepping in, he said, to something I should have done long ago. Before anyone could object, he stood. You can handle the Tokyo contract. I trust you all. And with that, he left the boardroom. Back at the apartment, Rachel was folding laundry when her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, half expecting it to be Christopher, but it was a breaking news notification. CEO Christopher West launches Fund for Musical Youth after Christmas Inspiration. She sat down slowly, reading the article. Photos from the hotel dinner were circulating. Charlie smiling up at Christopher, the handwritten lyrics of The Man with No Tree highlighted in the story. Comments poured in from strangers, parents, teachers, musicians. The story was spreading like wildfire, and the world was responding with warmth. Just then, the front door opened. Charlie ran in first, cheeks red from the cold, followed closely by Christopher, carrying a large cardboard box. What's all this? Rachel asked, rising. Music, Charlie beamed. He bought me a real keyboard, and books, and speakers. And a recorder, too, Christopher said breathlessly, setting the box down. I figured if I'm going to invest in the next Mozart, I'd better go all in. Rachel laughed, her eyes shining. You really didn't have to. I wanted to, Christopher said, his voice earnest. I missed so many holidays, so many chances to make something matter. Rachel stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You're making up for them beautifully. As Charlie set up his new keyboard, tapping excitedly at the keys, Christopher turned to Rachel. There's something else, he said softly. I've started house hunting. Rachel blinked. For what? For us, he said. Somewhere with a fireplace, space for a music room, and a tree that doesn't have to fit in a corner. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. You're not just giving Charlie a future, she said, choking up. You're giving him a home. Christopher reached for her hand, gripping it gently. I'm giving myself one, too. The press conference room inside Westline's headquarters buzzed with journalists, investors, and curious employees, the air thick with speculation. Cameramen adjusted their lenses, reporters whispered notes, and every eye turned when Christopher stepped onto the stage. No entourage, no notes, just a calm presence and the sound of soft snow falling outside the tall glass windows behind him. He looked different than the man they all knew. The crisp suit remained, but something in his face had softened, like a man who had finally exhaled after years of holding his breath. "I appreciate everyone being here," he began gently, his voice carrying not just through the microphone but through the silence of a room waiting to pounce. "I want to tell you a story." The audience shifted, puzzled. 3 days ago, during the Christmas storm, I took a taxi driven by a woman named Rachel. In the back seat was her 6-year-old son, Charlie. He was humming Silent Night and smiling like snow was magic. That ride changed me. Cameras clicked, heads tilted. Some smiled, some frowned. "Charlie sang me a song he wrote," Christopher continued. "It's called The Man with No Tree. That song wasn't about decorations. It was about loneliness. It was about a man who built a life so high up, he forgot what grounded him. He paused, emotion brimming. Until that night, I was that man." A hush blanketed the room. I've spent decades measuring success in units shipped, territories conquered, contracts signed. But none of that ever asked me, who am I when no one's watching? Who am I when the boardroom is empty? He pulled a sheet of music from his coat and unfolded it. "This is Charlie's song, and today I'm donating $2 million of my shares to the Charlie Grant Fund, supporting young artists from low-income families. This is not a PR stunt. It's my redemption." Reporters raised their hands frantically. One finally stood, microphone trembling. "Mr. West, there are rumors that the board threatened to vote you out if you continued this direction. Do you have a response?" Christopher smiled sincerely. "If I lose my job because I chose a child's future over a contract, then I never deserved the job in the first place." Gasps echoed. Whispers turned into nods. Some clapped, then more, until the entire room applauded, not out of formality, but out of something deeper, respect. Later that night, back in his suite, Christopher found Rachel and Charlie sitting on the carpet beside the fireplace, building a gingerbread house with lopsided windows and jelly bean shingles. "How'd it go?" Rachel asked softly. He sat beside them, unbuttoning his coat. "I may have shocked a few shareholders into early retirement." Charlie giggled. "Did you sing my song?" "I spoke about it," Christopher said warmly. They listened. Charlie nodded solemnly, pressing a gumdrop into the roof. "That's good. You gotta use your voice for people who don't have one yet." Rachel turned her head, eyes glistening. That's exactly what he did. They built in silence for a moment before Christopher asked, "How would you feel if I made your song the company's new holiday campaign?" Charlie's eyes widened. "For real?" "For real," Christopher confirmed. "You'll be credited as the songwriter, and all the money we raise will go to the foundation." Charlie stood and hugged him tightly without warning. "Best Christmas ever," he whispered. Christopher's throat tightened. 2 days later, the video went live. A simple black-and-white montage of shipping trucks rolling into small towns, kids opening parcels with art supplies, and Charlie's song playing faintly in the background, sung by a children's choir. The world responded instantly. Comments poured in, thousands every hour, messages from parents, teachers, even music legends. But it was a voicemail that hit Christopher hardest. "Mr. West," the voice said shakily, "my name is Teresa Mendoza. I'm a school counselor in New Mexico. I just wanted to say, Charlie's song saved one of my students. A boy who hasn't spoken in 6 months hummed it this morning. He asked to write a song. Thank you." Christopher sat motionless for a long time, the phone resting against his chest like something sacred. That evening, at Rachel's apartment, he helped hang the last strand of lights on a tiny tree they had decorated together. "You know," Rachel said quietly, "when Charlie was born, I didn't think I could raise him alone, but I did. And I always told myself, one day, someone would see him, not just his voice, but him." "You've done more than raise him," Christopher said gently. "You gave him a heart big enough to heal others. That's no small miracle." She looked at him, vulnerable now. And what about you? Who raised your heart? Christopher thought of the boy in the back seat, the cold that night, the question that pierced his armor. Do you have a family? He answered, with a tender whisper. Charlie did. Just then, Charlie bounded into the room wearing pajamas and holding a crumpled paper. I wrote another song, he declared. It's about 3 people and 1 tree. Rachel laughed, tears in her eyes. Let's hear it, Christopher said. And as Charlie sang in his small, perfect voice, Christopher sat back, realizing he didn't just find a song that night. He found something he didn't know he was missing: belonging. The week after the campaign launch felt like a whirlwind. Phone calls from journalists, messages from music academies, invitations to speak on national television. Yet, for Christopher, none of it compared to the quiet evenings spent at Rachel and Charlie's apartment, helping with homework, eating simple dinners, or listening to Charlie hum a new melody under his breath while brushing his teeth. For the first time in decades, his life felt real. And then came the call he wasn't expecting. Christopher, it's Anna from the board. Her voice was tight. We need to talk. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Charlie, coloring sheet music with red and green markers. Of course, he said cautiously. What's going on? There's been pushback. International partners think the campaign's too sentimental. Investors want reassurance that your focus hasn't shifted. Christopher's eyes flicked to Charlie, who was drawing a Santa hat on a treble clef. Set the meeting for tomorrow, he said calmly. I'll be there. After hanging up, Rachel walked in from the balcony. Everything all right? Christopher nodded slowly. Just the business side of life knocking again. Rachel sat beside him, searching his face. Are they going to make you choose? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Charlie, this boy who had unknowingly rescued him from a hollow life. Not this time, Christopher finally said. I already chose. The next morning, he entered the boardroom wearing his usual charcoal suit, but his demeanor radiated peace, not power. Around the table sat a dozen people, men and women who'd helped build Westline into a global empire, now unsure whether its leader had lost sight of their definition of vision. Anna cleared her throat. Christopher, thank you for coming, he nodded. Let's speak honestly. We're proud of the positive press, Anna began carefully. But there are concerns about long-term strategy, the foundation, the campaign. It's admirable, but is this the future of Westline? Christopher stood, not with defensiveness but quiet conviction. For years, we've said we connect people across distances, yet we've never stopped to ask why we do it. Silence, then murmurs. I've seen firsthand what connection means, not in shipping routes or quarterly earnings, but in a child's voice, in a widow's hope. If that's not our future, then what are we even building? One executive leaned forward. But what about growth? Christopher smiled faintly. Kindness is growth. Purpose is growth. And if we build a company that moves the world without ever touching a life, then all this, he gestured to the sleek conference room, means nothing. The room was quiet again. Then Anna leaned back slowly. I didn't agree with you until now, she admitted. But I see it. You're not abandoning the company. You're evolving it. Christopher exhaled. Exactly. Later that evening, as snow flurried gently outside the lobby windows, Rachel and Charlie walked into Westline HQ for a surprise invitation. Charlie wore his favorite scarf, navy with little white musical notes, and clutched a crumpled sheet of lyrics. Inside the company's new media room, a children's choir rehearsed quietly. The holiday campaign had gone viral, and Westline had arranged a special live performance of Charlie's song. Families from shelters, schools, and community centers gathered, many wearing pins shaped like Christmas trees. When Charlie took the stage with the choir, his cheeks flushed and eyes wide, he spotted Christopher in the front row. The boy lifted the mic with the trembling hands and softly said, "This song is for people who don't have a tree, or a fireplace, or sometimes even a hug. It's called The Man with No Tree, but I think maybe no one has to be that man anymore." The crowd clapped gently. Then the music began. Simple piano chords, a soft swell of strings, and Charlie sang with clear, bright vulnerability that brought tears to strangers' eyes. Christopher sat motionless, one hand clutching the armrest, the other resting over his heart. Rachel leaned against his shoulder. "He wrote that entire bridge last night," she whispered proudly. "I heard him," Christopher whispered back, and I finally understood. After the performance, a small reception was held. Employees brought their children, and local artists showcased handmade ornaments, some inspired by Charlie's lyrics. Laughter filled the air, and for once Westline didn't feel like a logistics company. It felt like a community. A woman in her 60s approached Christopher quietly. "My son, he stopped talking after my husband passed," she said shakily. "But after hearing Charlie's song online, he wrote me a note. Just one word, Christmas. That's the first word he's shared in 8 months." Christopher's eyes stung. "Thank you for telling me." "No," she said. "Thank you, and that little boy of yours." That night, as they drove back to Rachel's apartment, Charlie sat in the back seat, uncharacteristically quiet. "What's on your mind?" Christopher asked gently. Charlie looked up. "When Mom's driving, I sometimes wish I could close my eyes and wake up in a big warm house, with pancakes and music and someone to tuck me in." Christopher's throat closed. Rachel reached over, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Would you like to stay with me tonight?" Christopher asked tenderly. Charlie nodded slowly. "Then it's settled," he said. "We'll make pancakes tomorrow, but only if you help me flip them." Charlie laughed. "Deal." And as the snow whispered against the windshield, Christopher knew there was no going back. The morning sun broke gently across the skyline, dusting the city in a soft golden glow. Christopher West stood in the newly renovated kitchen of his once sterile penthouse, flipping pancakes with the concentration of a man trying to get it right. Not just the breakfast, but everything. Laughter echoed from the hallway. Charlie bounded into the room, still in pajama pants and a too large t-shirt that read Westline Winter Benefit. His face lit up the moment he saw the steaming stack of pancakes on the counter. "You made the smiley face ones?" he asked excitedly. "I even got the blueberries to stay in the eyes this time," Christopher said with a playful smirk. Rachel walked in behind him, rubbing her arms against the morning chill. Her eyes landed on the breakfast scene, and her lips curved into a quiet, grateful smile. "He practiced last night," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. Charlie climbed onto the bar stool, swinging his legs with impatient joy. "This is the best Christmas Eve ever!" Christopher placed a plate in front of him. "It's only going to get better." Charlie tilted his head. "Why?" Christopher glanced at Rachel, then back at the boy. "Because you and your mom are moving in." The words hung there for a breathless moment. Rachel blinked. "Christopher, we haven't even talked about—" "We have," he interrupted gently. "Maybe not with words, but everything since that snowstorm. Every night we've spent together, every song Charlie has sung, every moment you've both made this place feel like home. I don't want to let that go." Rachel's eyes welled up. Charlie looked between them, not entirely understanding, but sensing the significance. "Does this mean I get my own room?" he asked, wide-eyed. Christopher chuckled. "You already do. Come see." He led them down the hallway to the newly painted guest room, now fully transformed into a child's dream. A blue and silver comforter, a reading nook filled with music books, and above the headboard, framed lyrics, "The Man with No Tree." Charlie gasped and ran inside, his hands running over everything like he couldn't believe it was real. "You remembered all of it," he whispered. "I did," Christopher replied softly. Rachel stood in the doorway, stunned. "You did this in one night?" Christopher shrugged bashfully. "I had help. The board's kids sent suggestions." She stepped toward him slowly. "You really mean it? You want us here? With you?" He took her hands. "More than anything." She leaned in, pressing her forehead gently against his. "Then we're home." That evening, the penthouse glowed with the twinkling lights and soft carols humming from vintage speakers. A fir tree stood tall near the window, decorated entirely with handmade ornaments from Charlie's school, Rachel's old teaching days, and new additions from their fresh beginning. As the snow began to fall outside, Christopher stepped onto the balcony with a cup of cocoa. Charlie joined him, wrapped in a scarf, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "You know what I asked for?" the boy said. Christopher looked down at him, gently amused. "Let me guess. A guitar shaped like a rocket?" Charlie laughed. "No, I asked for one more night like this, with Mom smiling, with pancakes, with you." Christopher's heart clenched. "Well, I think Santa heard you loud and clear." Charlie leaned his head on Christopher's side, and together they stood in silence as the city shimmered below. The next morning, Christmas Day, Rachel found a small box under the tree with her name on it. She opened it slowly, unwrapping layers of tissue paper until she uncovered a simple silver pendant in the shape of a snowflake. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Christopher stepped behind her. "It's from Charlie's melody. The part where he sings, 'Even snow belongs somewhere.' You do, too." Tears spilled down Rachel's cheeks. She reached out, pulling him into a quiet, heartfelt embrace. "Thank you for believing in us." Charlie, still in pajamas, brought over a yurte picture he'd drawn with crayon. 3 stick figures stood under a tree, one tall, one with curly hair, and one with a musical note for a head. He'd written one word underneath: forever. Rachel smiled through tears. "That's our Christmas card next year." Christopher kneeled down, pulling Charlie close. "You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost." "Tree?" Charlie giggled. "A family," Christopher corrected, voice breaking. "And I'm never letting go." Later that night, as they sat curled on the couch under a shared blanket, Rachel whispered, "What happens next?" Christopher thought for a long moment before answering. "Tomorrow, we wake up, we eat pancakes, and then we build the rest of our lives. One note, one laugh, one step at a time." And outside the frost-kissed windows of the penthouse, high above the city lights, the star on their Christmas tree twinkled, not just as a symbol of the season, but of something far greater. Redemption, love, and the beautiful truth that no one, no matter how lost or lonely, is ever truly without a home.